Everybody makes mistakes, but some are more high stakes than others. The next time you goof up, remember it can always be worse, as evidenced by these extremely costly mishaps. Superman's mustache. Who would have thought a humble mustache could cause so much trouble? You certainly didn't think it was possible when you left your latest facial fuzz trimmings on the sink for your girlfriend to find, and neither did Henry Cavill when he showed up to extensive reshoots of Justice League film rocking a pretty impressive mo. Following director Zack Snyder's departure, a whole series of reshoots have been ordered by new director Joss Whedon, believed to be costing approximately an extra $25 million. A hefty fine to pay for just one mustache. Cavill certainly hasn't helped alleviate the headache of the film's post-production crew, who will have to digitally remove the Jersey man's tash using the power of movie magic. Growing out his facial hair for his role in the upcoming Mission Impossible film, we can only assume that it's easy to edit out a mustache than to add one back on, which is a little disappointing if we're being honest, as seeing Superman with a handlebar would truly have been a sight to see. Superman's also not the only superhero who has undergone a bit of a facial hair makeover recently, with Chris Evans as Captain America sporting an impressive beard on the latest poster for Avengers: Infinity War. Marvel and DC might be going head to head at the box office, but we're disappointed that we won't get to see Superman's mustache and Captain America's beard sort out their differences like real men. Like real hairy men. Lottery loss. It could be all of us. More than 1,000 people claim they've won £113 million Euro Millions jackpot. More than 1,000 people have come forward to claim they are the rightful holders of the missing £113 million Euro Millions ticket. Lottery firm Camelot revealed it had been inundated by people claiming they had lost their ticket to the draw in October 2010. The claims, coming from around the country, are understood to include some from people who have admitted they do not even know whether the ticket they mislaid matched the winning numbers. One woman who has laid claim to the fortune said her ticket matched the missing numbers, but claimed her husband threw it in the bin. The pensioner says she gave him the ticket for safekeeping before the Euro Millions draw, and he binned it by mistake. If they are the rightful winners, the couple, who have been married for more than 50 years, have already lost £8,500 a day in interest since the draw on October 8, 2010. The prize, however, would still put them 589th on Britain's rich list, with more money than Robbie Williams, David Bowie, or Rod Stewart. After coming to terms with the unfortunate situation, the pensioner said she had forgiven her husband for 50 years, but I'm sure he won't be taking the trash out ever again. Splendid China. The idea for Splendid China here in Florida was that of Josephine Chen, a Taiwanese-American schoolteacher and real estate developer. The thought was the park would be a great means for cultural exchange between China and the United States. Josephine traveled to China in 1988 and was welcomed by officials of the China Travel Services (CTS), a government agency. They gave her a tour of a prototype park, Splendid China Miniature Scenic Spot located in Shenzhen. The park had huge success, having over 3.5 million people visit in the first year, and the CTS recouping its staggering $100 million investment that same year. In the first 3 years since its opening, the park took many blows, hurting them financially and their public appearance. The protests attracted media attention, which helped keep the attendance low, as well as around 42 Chinese performers requested political asylum in the US, claiming they were being held against their will. Sunny Yang was put in charge in March 1996, as well as management was being replaced in what the Orlando Sentinel described as a big management shakeup. Even though management has changed, Splendid China was turning out to be a commercial failure. In 1999, it was reported that the park was losing an estimated $9 million a year. In May 2000, rumors had surfaced that the park was to be sold off and closed soon. A year later, around December 2004, many of the park's assets were auctioned off, including many of the miniature figurines and statues. The property was sold to a redevelopment firm in May 2005. Since then, the park has sat in a state of disrepair as vandals have made it their playground. Though there is a security presence on site, Osceola County deputy sheriffs have responded to nearly 100 times for calls about trespassers, suspicious persons, and juveniles jumping over the fences. The park has since been demolished to make way for Jimmy Buffet's Margaritaville Resort. Cerro Grande Fire. May 10, 2000, was the day the wind-driven Cerro Grande fire roared into Los Alamos, destroying 235 homes and displacing more than 400 people. Homes would still be burning 5 days later, though no one would perish. The monstrous wildfire, which began as a prescribed burn ignited by federal crews but raged out of control, also spread to Los Alamos National Laboratory's forested lands, burning dozens of structures and threatening a facility that housed radioactive material. The Cerro Grande fire scorched 43,000 acres and caused an estimated $1 billion in damage. It led to multiple investigations into what went wrong and propelled federal agencies into a deep soul searching on how fire and land management policy should be revamped. The fire was named after the Cerro Grande Peak, the spot where a 32-person crew lit a prescribed burn on the evening of May 4, 2000. They had decided to conduct the burn in spring when conditions were drier, despite the higher risk of a runaway blaze, because past attempts at controlled burns there in the fall had failed. Later, officials would find the managers had ignored forecasts that winds might kick up. The managers would claim the forecasts didn't raise red flags. But as they learned how hazardous the fire had become, they requested a team of U.S. Forest Service hotshots and told their supervisor to treat it like a wildfire. It took the hotshots almost 5 hours to get there, partly because they were resting after fighting another forest fire. The 9-hour lag for help to arrive after Powell's initial call was costly, around $1 billion. Spirit of Kansas crash. On February 23, 2008, the United States Air Force suffered the most costly accident in its history when one of its most expensive planes ever crashed. The Spirit of Kansas, tail number 89-127, a Northrop B-2 Spirit bomber, crashed on the runway shortly after takeoff from Andersen Air Force Base, AFB, in Guam. The aircraft was one of 4 B-2s preparing to return to Whiteman following a deployment that began on October 5, 2007, as part of a continuous U.S. bomber presence in the Western Pacific. Spirit of Kansas, which had logged 5,100 flight hours. The two officers attempted to control the bomber when one of its wingtips made contact with the ground but were unable to do so. Both Link and Grieve were able to successfully eject and survive the crash. However, the aircraft was destroyed, and the cost of the total loss of the B-2 was estimated to be an eye-watering $1.4 billion. The investigation found after heavy, lashing rains, moisture entered a skin flush air data sensor, which is used to calculate numerous factors including airspeed and altitude. The moisture on the sensor caused the jet to receive inaccurate data. In addition, 3 pressure transducers had also been improperly calibrated by the maintenance crew due to condensation inside the devices. As a result, the flight control computers calculated inaccurate aircraft angles of attack and airspeed. Incorrect airspeed data on cockpit displays led to the aircraft rotating at 12 knots slower than indicated. When the B-2's wheels lifted from the runway, the flight control system erroneously sensed a negative angle of attack, which then caused the computers to inject a sudden, 1.6 gram, uncommanded 30-degree pitch-up maneuver. The combination of slow liftoff speed and the extreme angle of attack, with attendant drag, resulted in an unrecoverable stall, yaw, and descent. While the pilots attempted to correct the problem, they were unable to regain control and ejected. The B-2 hit the ground, tumbled, and burned after its fuel ignited. Costa Concordia disaster. Many famous naval disasters happen far out at sea, but on January 13, 2012, the Costa Concordia wrecked just off the coast of an Italian island in relatively shallow water. The avoidable disaster killed 32 people and seriously injured many others, and left investigators wondering, why was the luxury cruise ship sailing so close to the shore in the first place? During the ensuing trial, prosecutors came up with a tabloid-ready explanation. The married ship captain had sailed it so close to the island to impress a much younger Moldovan dancer with whom he was having an affair. The captain and 4 other crew members were tried for misconduct, and Shedino was sentenced to 16 years in prison for his dumb actions. The total cost of the disaster is now an estimated $2 billion, more than 3 times the $612 million it cost to build, which included victims' compensations, lawsuits of $93 million, salvage costs, and $100 million for the ship to be broken into scrap metal. Bay Bridge. After the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake that rocked the Bay Area, officials got serious about rebuilding the vulnerable Bay Bridge connecting San Francisco and Oakland. The first cost estimates, released in 1995, figured both east and west spans of the bridge could be upgraded for a cuddly $250 million. By the time the new east span opened in September 2013, the price tag for that span alone had reached a reported $6.5 billion, with a just-your run-of-the-mill rise of 2,500%. The agency's initial estimate for fixing both east and west spans came to $250 million, a figure that could be viewed as a rounding error for the final, and still being counted, total. In June 1995, the state legislature agreed to $2 billion in total funding for all the state's toll bridges, plus more than 1,000 non-toll structures. The cost increase was the result of detailed engineering studies conducted during the year or so after the initial estimate was released. It was built in China to save money, a decision that carried its costs when inspectors later found poor welding and busted bolts at key points that required fixing. Frick says the current $6.5 billion total is a rough estimate, and that it doesn't include interest or financing costs. With those costs included, some expect the total price to double yet again, to $13 billion. Australia's NBN rollout. The NBN company was announced in April 2009 to provide terrestrial fibre network coverage for 93% of Australian premises by the end of 2020. Fixed wireless and satellite coverage would serve the remaining 7%. The final 60 early NBN rollout locations were then announced. The plan was for the first stage of the large-scale rollout to follow, connecting 3.5 million premises in 1,500 communities by mid-2015. The early NBN rollout experienced significant delays. This attracted a great deal of overwhelmingly negative media coverage. Public opinion polls reflected growing dissatisfaction with the national project. This dissatisfaction and the September 2013 federal election result changed the fate of the NBN. In 2013, the new coalition government suspended the first stage of the large-scale fiber-to-premises NBN rollout to reassess the scale of the project. In 2014, the government announced that the NBN rollout would change from a primarily fiber-to-premises model to a multi-technology mix model. The technology to be used would be determined on an area-by-area basis. This change of direction resulted in a prolonged state of uncertainty at the local government level. As it was rolled out, the NBN was widely criticized for being slow, expensive, and obsolete. As a result, the project cost jumped from an estimated $29.5 billion before the 2013 federal election to some $46 billion afterward. And it's now expected to cost a jaw-dropping $51 billion by 2020. Ron Wayne's Apple shares. How would you feel if you missed out on a business opportunity that could have made you millions or even billions of dollars? Ronald Wayne was in on the ground floor of what is now the world's richest company but cashed out early, missing out on a massive financial windfall. Wayne worked in Nevada's gaming industry before landing in Silicon Valley in the mid-1970s. There he met two 20-somethings who wanted to launch a new computer company with him. Their names were Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and the company was Apple Computer. Their original deal gave Jobs and Wozniak each a 45% share in the nascent company and Wayne 10%. A self-taught computer engineer, Wayne had already been burned by startups in the past. Add to that, he felt the mercurial behavior of one of his young partners was cause for concern. After less than a year, he sold his 10% stake in Apple for $800. Last year, Apple became the first company with a $1 trillion valuation. This week the company's market cap was nearly $940 billion. If Wayne had held on to his 10% stake in the company, he'd be worth nearly $94 billion, a net worth that rivals some of the world's wealthiest people. He walked away from what would become one of the biggest fortunes in the history of capitalism, but if you're looking for an ounce of regret in Wayne, you won't find it. He says he is totally at peace with his decision to walk away from Apple. Chernobyl disaster. The Chernobyl nuclear accident disaster occurred on April 26, 1986, at the number 4 nuclear reactors in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, located near the city of Pripyat in the north of Ukraine in the former Soviet Union. The disaster happened after a safety test went wrong and caused an explosion that blew up part of reactor number 4. The explosion caused a fire that burned for more than a week. A cloud of radiation was released into the atmosphere. The radiation spread across the local area and over large parts of Europe. According to some reports, the amount of radioactive material was estimated to be 400 times more than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The cause of the Chernobyl disaster is attributed to human error and mismanagement of the nuclear power plant control room. An exclusion zone of 19 miles was defined around the plant in all directions around Chernobyl, which was then abandoned. Soon after, this area became a ghost town with buildings left to rot and almost all humans fleeing for their lives. The disaster is also considered to be one of the causes that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. The 1986 Chernobyl catastrophe that exposed some 10 million people to nuclear radiation in the surrounding countries has estimated costs of roughly $700 billion over the past 30 years. Which of these disastrous errors do you think could have been easily avoided? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.